Former Florida Republican congressman and an outspoken Trump critic these days, Carlos Curbelo. He's also an MSNBC contributor, and Charlie Sykes, editor-in-chief of The Bulwark, and also an MSNBC contributor. Carlos, I'm going to start with you. You certainly, I think the president liked to overemphasize how to pronounce your name. That was his way of taking a shot at you. How hard is it for you to criticize the president and talk to Republicans back home in Florida? How much grief do you get?
Well, certainly. Look, the biggest fear that any House Republican has, Todd, is getting a primary challenge. Everyone saw what happened to Mark Sanford in South Carolina. Mark was outspoken, like many of us were as well, and he got a primary challenge. The president got involved, and Mark lost his primary. And yes, it's sometimes difficult when you encounter the more staunch Republican voters, but a lot of people, Chuck, more than I think the average member of Congress realizes, a lot of people do respect when you take principled stands and do appreciate it. So, you know, it's tough, but it's something that people have to do. It's the right thing to do.
Charlie, you heard Johnny Isakson say something. Mitt Romney put out a tweet. He said, I can't understand why the president would once again disparage a man as exemplary as my friend John McCain, heroic, courageous, patriotic, honorable, self-effacing, self-sacrificing, empathetic, and driven by duty of family, country, and God. That's the entire list of Republicans, sitting Republican senators who chose to take the president on by name. Mitch McConnell put out a tweet today that just to say nice things about John McCain. He was just thinking about him today.
Vanilla.
What makes this so difficult?
That's an extraordinarily interesting question because, okay, we can't normalize this because I understand that people are afraid of the tweets, but is any Republican going to lose re-election because they stood up for John McCain? Are they this terrified?
Charlie, believe it or not, I have Republican viewers who do say to me, you don't understand. John McCain's a traitor. John McCain's done
I see that.
They do. You probably get these same. It is amazing how much of the president's base views John McCain in a more negative tone than Hillary Clinton.
This is one of the most appalling things. It's not just that the president's criticisms are vile and reveals his insecurities. It's also the way that his supporters then will make these vile attacks, not just on John McCain, but on members of his family. And this is part of the transformation of his base and of the Republican Party. And so, look, you know, this is not about a substantive issue. This is not like voting against tax cuts. This is not about voting on Obamacare. This is not voting against a Supreme Court justice. This should be a basic, minimal thing that any Republican should do to say, Mr. President, okay, we're with you on all these other things, but you cannot demean an American hero. And then watching his performance in Lima, Ohio, how do you not just shake your head and say, you know, is this my leader? Is this the person that I want to give another 4 years in office?
Carlos, and this is the part of this. There is a part of the Trump base, I don't know what else to call it, and it used to be part of the Republican base, that just wants to make liberals cry, I guess, or just wants to, own the libs, that's all the Trump candidacy is for these folks. And you see it highlighted a lot in Twitter. But I do come across these folks. I know you do, too. They love it. They don't lament it. They love it. What has happened?
Well, Chuck, I call it political intoxication. A lot of people watch this as if it was a sport, a contest, a reality TV show. And the president, of course, feeds this because it's good for him politically, and I think it satisfies his ego. Now, what Republicans have to realize is that there will be a post-Trump era. We don't know if that's going to begin in 2020 for Republicans or in 2024.
Some of us think it'll be 2032, maybe after the fourth term.
Well, I'm sure some people are thinking about that somewhere. Yeah. But the longer Republicans are quiet, the more Republicans refuse to stand up for common decency. This is not a policy question here, okay? I voted for the tax bill. I voted for health care to reform it and to replace it. This is not a policy question. This is a question of common decency. These are things that our parents taught us and our grandparents taught us when we were children. And a lot of these same parents and grandparents applaud this type of behavior, even though they taught their children and grandchildren not to do it. So Charlie, it's become a kind of cult, and it's dangerous.
Charlie, I'm probably setting you up here, but I got to play Lindsey Graham today on John McCain. Had to be asked. And then Lindsey Graham 4 years ago. Here he is today.
My job is to represent the people of South Carolina. They want me to work with the president where I can. I've got to know the president. We have a good working relationship. I like him. I don't like it when he says things about my friend John McCain.
And then here is Lindsey Graham in 2015, after the first time the president attacked McCain.
How could anybody wanting to be commander-in-chief even suggest that John McCain and people like him are anything less than a hero? So he's a train wreck, he's a car wreck, and I think he's shown yet again why he's not going to make it through this process.
Well, obviously, he's as good of a political pundit as the rest of us these days. But that's the two Lindsey Grahams.
And it's pathetic. I mean, look, I understand that Lindsey Graham is running for re-election next year, but I mean, and I understand that he wants to have access to the president, but you hope that there's part of him that is just ashamed. This was a man that he knew, the man that he respected. He understands what he is doing is indefensible, but the obsequiousness, the sycophancy of people like Lindsey Graham, is really part of this extraordinary moment that we're living in politics. So, the congressman used the term intoxication. I would use the term corruption. That John McCain demeans everyone around him, and he demeans the people. He demands that they demean themselves. It's like he's testing. How far can I push what you are willing to accept and enable from me? And he keeps pushing it and pushing it. And Lindsey Graham has become almost this lab rat.
He's the
one. He's the guy. It's like, I'm going to push Lindsey. Can I get Lindsey to actually cave in? I'm going to insult over and over again his good friend John McCain. And will he respond? And we just saw this. And that was pathetic.
Carlos, what is the anecdote? What is the anecdote?
The anecdote? Well, I don't know, Chuck. But again, the longer that this continues to go on, the worse it's going to be for Republicans a few years from now. And again, what we see with Senator Graham is that, who, by the way, is a friend. I know him well, worked with him on a number of issues. But the fear of a primary in the Republican Party is what drives a lot of the conduct on the Hill. And it's impossible to lead with fear. And one day, everyone is going to be held accountable for this era, for everything we're seeing. How that happens, how that unfolds, I don't know. But again, I don't see how this ends well.
Charlie, is the superpower that Trump has, because I always say here that our power in the press and the power in elected officials to criticize is what? To make you feel shame. Yeah. So Al Franken decides to resign, or Congresswoman Omar writes an op-ed and apologizes. We can say we don't like the apology, but that's the whole point. That's how it works. He is immune to this.
He is.
Is this his superpower? Is it shamelessness?
It is absolutely his superpower, because you can't throw anything at him. He will never be embarrassed. He will never apologize. He feels no sense of shame. But the question is, does Lindsey Graham have that superpower? Is there part of him that is also shameless, that feels no sense of shame? Has he communicated that shamelessness to his entire party, to his entire base? And if he does, then, the moment he leaves office, we're not going to snap back. I mean, this is going to leave something
Everybody
indelible.
who thinks we're snapping back is beyond naive.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. And again, part of the problem is the normalization, because how many times have we had this conversation? We feel like we're caught in this vortex loop.
It's like we don't have the conversation. Yeah. Why aren't you? And if you do, why do you guys keep having the same conversation? Because it's not normal.
Yeah, it is not normal. And I think what you're seeing with the president going out and attacking George Conway, who's raising questions about his stability, and every time the president speaks now or tweets, he seems to be confirming what George Conway is suggesting.
No, that's for sure. That situation, I'll be honest, I tried to keep that off the air because they have kids. That's all I'm going to say. I wish the president would respect that. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.